Morning everybody, happy Monday. It's a new week and today we're going to be revisiting this big topic of reading in foreign languages. As you all know, this is a huge passion of mine. So we're going to talk about some different ways that reading in a foreign language actually impacts your overall skill level and your overall comfort speaking a language as well as reading it. And we're also going to look at an example from my Mandarin Chinese journey. As you all know, I'm learning Mandarin and we've been looking at my journey into becoming a fluent reader of Mandarin Chinese as well as speaking. So I'm reading these graded readers. So I'll use that as a way to illustrate how it's impacting my experience. And I'm also going to show you some little tips and insights into ways that I am turning a passive activity of sort of extensive reading, a graded reader, into an active activity with showing you how I take notes. That's all coming up. Let's jump in. Okay, so as I was reading this morning, I went through about 2 chapters of And More, which is the adaptation of Emma by Jane Austen, done by Mandarin Companion, and I had a whole video about that last week. I'll link that in the description. And so as I was reading, it's such an interesting experience because it really feels like reading this book is helping me to sort of stitch together all the knowledge I have in Mandarin Chinese. And so I thought of this really nice analogy. So I feel like in this case, learning a language in the beginning, it's a bit like making a patchwork quilt. Now I've actually used patchwork quilts in other analogies in the past, but so as you are acquiring knowledge in Mandarin, let's say, it's almost like all the words, phrases, grammatical structures, all these different pieces of knowledge. It's like collecting the patches that you're gonna put on the quilt, right? But they're all separate. They're all sort of, they're flowing around. You might lose one, you might drop one, forget where you put it. You can't think, what was it again? Where was it? So you're collecting all these patches, but the thing is, they're not necessarily super cohesive. They don't necessarily make up a whole yet, right? And so things can feel very fragmented. And to me, when I start reading, right, and I think the same thing happens when you start speaking, but it is a bit of a different experience and it depends on what you like doing. But the thing about speaking is, again, it's an extremely spontaneous, in the moment activity, and there's not a whole lot of time to be terribly thoughtful about what you're doing. So I think speaking can be a great way to achieve a similar type of experience and a similar result, but it's much more about testing your instincts. You know, how well are you able to pick the right word in the moment? How well can you choose the correct sentence structure? Reading is really nice because it's an incredibly slow and thoughtful process, and you get to go at your own pace, right? You can reread sentences over and over again, and you can really take nice notes, ponder the meaning of things, and it's also a lot easier to discuss, right? So you can very easily take a book, take a sentence, take your notes, and go and talk to somebody and ask them, what does this mean? And why is it like this? And what's the nuance of this? Or how does this word impact the sentence? And so for me, what this does, it's like taking all those patches and finally kind of sewing them together onto my quilt, right? So it feels like as I'm reading this book, especially after I just had that really nice first Mandarin conversation with Jake Gill from Skritter. So again, that was really good. And now it's set me up for this really nice place where reading this book, it feels like all the words I've learned in Mandarin, all the different phrases, all the grammar structures in particular. Because in Chinese, just like every other language, there are all these set patterns. So in Mandarin, an example is something like shi, da da da, da. This pattern where you kind of sandwich a sentence with shi and da. I'm not going to go into the details because this is not a Mandarin Chinese focused video. This is just an example to say that that's a sentence pattern that you see a lot in textbooks. You see it a lot when learning. However, you may not necessarily use that sentence structure, right? Because it's kind of difficult. You may not fully grasp it. So if you're just speaking to people, you may not really think to use it. And when you're listening to people speak, you're going to be so focused on what they're saying and the overall meaning, you're probably not going to be constantly thinking, oh, there's that pattern again. Sure, duh, great, especially because you have a lot of content in between these two pieces. When you're reading a book, what I'm finding is I'm seeing that pattern over and over again. So it's forcing me or helping me to finally actually think critically and see like, oh, interesting. So here's how this pattern that in theory, I know what it means, right? I've seen it before, I've read the explanations. I think I kind of know how to use it. I've even used it myself once or twice, but now I'm seeing it over and over and over again in a real context with real natural language. And like I say, it's really helping me stitch all those random patches I've collected over the last couple years almost, and stitch them together onto a beautiful quilt that, you know, it's more secure. I don't lose the patches anymore because I'm sewing them nice and tightly onto this beautiful quilt that I can carry around with me. I can use it in different ways. I could use it as a picnic blanket. I could use it to keep me warm. I could use it to hold things together. You get the idea. The point is, it becomes this thing that exists as a whole and that you can use in lots of different ways. So now I'd like to show you the sort of process I went through over the last few days to finally figure out sort of a method. Because many of you will know, especially if you read my book or if you've seen this channel for a long time, I'm always kind of inventing my own systems, my own methods, or at least creating my own flavors of things. So I rarely take a prescribed method and just follow it. I'm always being a critical thinker about how I'm studying and how it works best for me. And so what I would like to achieve here is I would like to encourage you to also do the same, right? So I'm gonna show you the method that I have developed over the last few days. I like it so far. I actually took the extra effort to create 2 separate sets of notes so you could really see clearly the process I went through to evolve my method. Now, maybe my method works perfectly for you, and so feel free to take it and use it. But the point is, I would encourage you to think critically about, does this work perfectly for me? If not, how could you perhaps adjust my method to fit better for you? And I think over the long term, that's what's gonna make you an amazing language learner. It's this ability to have the self-awareness of what you like to do, what works for you, and the experience of, you know, learning in the past and knowing what worked then. That's what's going to make you a really self-sufficient, independent language learner. So what I did originally, because many of you will know I love to take notes, and so I actually have a little piece of paper here that I took out of my notebook where I was actually basically writing down all the words that I came across in the book that I either wasn't familiar with or I knew the word, but in the moment it wouldn't come to me, right? Because I wanted to document what are all the words that I struggled with so I can make sure that, you know, I hammer those out and learn them really well. And by the way, as I've done in the past, I'm gonna share a link to a Google Drive folder in the description of the video in case you wanna actually go and download pictures of my notes, just because it might be nicer for you to read that way. It's just if that would be helpful for you. But what I found is that this was quite time consuming, right? Because I was handwriting each different word. Now, I enjoy that, so I especially enjoy it with Chinese characters. So whether it's Japanese or Chinese, I love that. But it was very time consuming. And so I'm trying to balance the things that I really like doing, but I also need to make sure that I do get through these stories, because the whole point of graded readers initially it's to get you actually reading, right? So you can finish a story and not spend, 6 months getting through 2 chapters of a novel, right? So what I did is I actually looked and I saw that, okay, so I have a combination here of words that I'm not really sure about, words that I missed, but they're fine, I can study these words. But I also had these really cool notes, because when I read something, or when I listen to something, like if I'm studying an episode of Easy Mandarin or Easy German, or if I'm studying the conversation I have with Jake, well, I'm gonna take lots of notes about, oh, I really like the way that Jake said this sentence, or like, oh, that's a really nice way of putting it, or like, oh, I like how this sounded. Very often, this is stuff I'm confused about, where I'm like, I don't think I understand exactly what the nuance of this word is. But also, I very often write things down that I understood it perfectly, but I would not have known to say it that way. I wouldn't have had that sentence in my personal repertoire, so I write that down. And I think a lot of people, they miss so many opportunities to improve their language repertoire because they think, oh, well, I understood it, so I don't need to write it down. In my opinion, 75% of what I write down in this sort of study activity, it's stuff that I did understand, but it's like, oh, I want that, right? I want to be able to say it just like that. And by doing this, that's how you end up with the ability to say things in natural conversations. And people go, wow, that was really natural. Like, whoa, that was perfect. Like, you had the perfect word choice. That's how I do that. And it happens to me very often when I get to high levels. It's because I'm constantly taking things that I heard or read in a native context and I'm applying it to my own language repertoire. So that is the stuff I think that's really the solid gold when it comes to note taking. And so I actually decided to scrap that first version of my notes and I created a second version. And once again, I will post that link to the Google Drive so you'll be able to download a photograph of this page in case you want to see it in more detail and maybe you want to try modeling your own notes the way that I did. But essentially, my notes now, they're just a collection of those questions, those thoughts, those gems that I want to take, So I think this is far more efficient. So what I'm doing after that is I'm actually using Skritter. So a lot of you will know I like the app Skritter for learning Chinese characters and memorizing vocabulary in either Chinese or Japanese. So if you're learning Mandarin Chinese or Japanese, it could be a great option for you. So I have actually decided to share my decks with you. So I talked to Jake and he helped me set up what's called a classroom where I can essentially just share my decks. So again, I'm just sharing this in case it's helpful for you. So I'll leave a link in the description. I do have an affiliate link for Skritter. So if you want to support me and try it out, I believe you get 10% off if you use my link. But either way, the most important thing is that if you want to see my exact deck and if you want to study along with me, then I'm going to leave a second link which will, once you sign up for Skritter or if you're already using it, then that link will actually give you access to all of my decks in the future. So what I did is I've been using Skritter to create my vocabulary list. So if you're learning a different language, you might use Anki or Memrise or any flashcarding app that you like. But the reason why I like Skritter in this case is that it also functions as a dictionary for me. So what I do is I just search for words as they come up, and then Skritter finds the word for me, and I can just add it straight to my vocabulary list. So that's why I like it, because instead of having step 1, look in the dictionary, step 2, add that word manually to flashcarding system, with Skritter it's nice because that's one step. I just search for the word in the add words, and then it gives me the result if it has it, and I just click it, it's in my deck. So this is my workflow. The first time, I read the chapter all the way through without really stopping. These books are nice because they do have a few key words at the bottom of the page, especially words that you're less likely to know. So I will glance down at those, but essentially step 1 is I read the whole chapter all the way through. Step 2 is I go back again and now I start taking these notes, right? So I'll do a combination. I'll have my app open with Skritter, again, or any flashcarding app that you use, and I'll start adding in the words that I didn't know. And it's quite a quick process. I can add all the vocab for a whole chapter in 20 to 30 minutes easy. It's not a very long process. So I'll go through, I'll add the words, and as I find sentences where I think, ooh, I really want to write this down for all the reasons we discussed a minute ago, well, that's when I'll write those things down. So this is a way for me, like I said, to turn what is primarily a very passive process of just reading extensively, so reading the graded reader without really stopping, guessing the meaning as best I can, and just continuing on. Well, then I come back and I turn that into an active study process where it deepens my learning activity because I'm writing things down, I'm thinking really critically about every little thing. Then it also gives me a way to consolidate that knowledge because I can study those flashcards with Skritter or any other app, and that helps me consolidate the vocab. But also I have these questions now, so I can go to somebody like a tutor or a native speaking or advanced speaking friend of mine, and I can ask for clarification on these questions because I find it's very difficult to remember all these questions in your head. And very often, if you have a friend and you're like, okay, can I ask you about this? Let me see, where was it? It gets very difficult to keep track of all the questions that you had. So that's my personal method right now for active study of graded readers. And I really hope that's helpful. I hope you like seeing my process of how my method evolved and how I started out, writing lots of vocabulary words, and then I kind of transitioned to making my method more efficient so that I could strike that balance of, yeah, I'm spending a lot of time doing this, but it feels right. I can still get through one chapter every day if I study for about 1 hour. Okay, everybody, I know that was a bit long, but I hope that was helpful. I really enjoyed this video. I enjoyed this whole process, and I'm looking forward to finishing this book, seeing how much it improves my Mandarin. And I'm ecstatic that over there on my bookshelf, I have, 4 other level 1 stories, and then I have 3 level 2 stories. I really believe this is going to dramatically improve not just my reading skills, but also my speaking and listening skills, and even my writing skills. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you back here Wednesday for the next episode.